Move, old man. It started with just a simple request. An old man, dressed neatly and speaking politely, asked a group of young men to form a line at the gas station. One of them laughed, pushed him aside, and without warning, threw a punch that knocked the man to the ground. No one person stepped forward to help. Almost 30 minutes later, a black SUV arrived. No one could have expected that the man stepping out of the vehicle was the old man's son and also the sheriff of the county. What would you have done if you were there? Do you believe silence in the face of cruelty is ever justified? Leave a comment with the word kindness. Another morning arrived, carrying the same chill of mist and the thick ice left behind by the snowstorm the night before. Samuel Raines woke up at exactly 5:03 a.m., just as he had done every Tuesday morning for the past 15 years. That routine had never changed, though it had slowed slightly with age. He shaved with a steady hand, slow but unfaltering. His white shirt had been carefully ironed the night before, its cuffs sharply creased, the buttons aligned perfectly. In the top drawer of his nightstand, a small, silver star-shaped pin remained in its usual place. It had tarnished over time, but he wiped it clean every night before going to bed. He touched the cool metal gently, then pinned it to the left side of his chest, exactly where it had always belonged. The 1999 Buick LeSabre started with a deep, gravelly roar, as if it still remembered the years spent on the road. He turned the heater up 2 notches, not 3, then drove exactly 3 miles down the hill to the place he still called the last gas station with any character. Maynard Station hadn't changed. There was still the familiar ding of the bell when a car pulled in. Still the faded tile floor just inside the counter. Still the faint smell of slightly burnt coffee that carried a scent of memory. To Samuel Raines, that gas station wasn't just part of his routine. It was a place that made him feel like the world still had a few simple things that time hadn't washed away. That morning, snow was falling gently and steadily, covering the hood of Samuel's car with a soft white layer as he pulled into the station. 2 other cars had arrived before him, an old pickup truck and a newer SUV, both waiting to fill their tanks. He turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and opened the door. His right hand reached out to steady himself against the frame, and his feet touched the ground slowly. Every movement felt heavy, but each one was carried out with care. The pain in his knees no longer made him grimace. After so many years, he had learned to live with it. As soon as he stepped out, he saw them. 5 large motorcycles were parked carelessly in front of the store entrance, leaning to the side and blocking almost the entire walkway. Black leather jackets were draped across the seats, each one stitched with patches of skulls, chains, numbers, and unfamiliar slogans. Around them stood 5 young men, likely in their 20s or 30s, their hair slicked back, collars open, each holding an energy drink, laughing loudly with voices that shattered the calm morning air. Samuel said nothing at first. He opened the gas tank, picked up the nozzle as usual, and after finishing the fueling, he slowly walked toward the store. He had no intention of starting anything. He simply needed to pay, and the only path inside was completely blocked by the group and their bikes. Standing a few steps away, he spoke in a low, clear voice, not raising it even slightly. "Gentlemen, would you mind stepping aside? There are others waiting." There was a brief silence. One of them, the tallest, turned around. He had a tattoo running from his neck to his collarbone and a pair of cold, narrow eyes. "What did you say, old man?" He raised an eyebrow, then turned to his friends with a sneer. "Did you hear that? Grandpa wants to teach us how to line up." Samuel kept his tone steady, neither louder nor softer. "Just common courtesy. This station is small, and no one likes crowding." The group burst into laughter. Another chimed in with sarcasm. "Courtesy? You hear that? Sounds like something out of the 1940s. Samuel didn't respond right away. His eyes drifted past them and landed on a car parked nearby. Inside, a woman and 2 small children were watching. The little girl looked tense, and the boy beside her had sunk behind the seat. Samuel turned back toward the young men. This time, he was no longer standing fully upright, but leaned slightly forward, as if speaking to each of them individually. "I don't expect your respect. I only hope you understand that stepping aside doesn't cost you anything, but it lets others feel seen. The Bluetooth speaker hanging from one of the motorcycles fell silent. A strange stillness filled the space. The wind kept blowing through sleeves and across the snow-covered ground, swirling in the thin air between an old man and 5 young men who had yet to decide how to react. One of the young men stepped forward, his shoulder leaning in slightly, his eyes more entertained than angry. He looked like the kind of person who enjoyed provoking others just to pass the time. "Courtesy?" he scoffed. "We were here first. There's no sign, no rules." Another guy crossed his arms and leaned against his bike, eyeing Samuel from head to toe with a mocking smirk. Then he spoke, not loudly, but just enough for everyone to hear. "I bet he's about to give us a war lecture." Samuel didn't move. His voice stayed level, calm, the kind one might use with a nephew, not a group of strangers. "I've learned when to stay silent. I've also learned when to speak up. Today I think it's worth speaking." Wind swept across the station, carrying small flurries of snow to the cuffs of their pants, but no one budged. An older couple who had been filling up at the next pump stopped what they were doing and simply watched. Behind the store's glass door, the young clerk stood frozen, still holding the rag he had used to wipe down cups. The tattooed one took another step forward. Now he was less than an arm's length from Samuel. "So what do you want?" he asked, his tone dropping low, as if pretending to be reasonable. "You want us to apologize? Want us to line up like school kids?" He let out a dry chuckle. "Don't think being old makes you important." Samuel didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed a hand over his chest, where the silver star-shaped pin had dulled with time. His eyes no longer held the fire of youth, but something else rested there, something steady. "I don't want your apology," he said slowly. "I just want to remind you that some things aren't required, but they're still right. That's the difference between getting by and choosing to be decent." The air thickened. 1 second passed, then another. One of the young men leaned forward, shaking his head like he was about to say something, but stopped. He looked over at the tattooed one, clearly waiting for his lead. It came quickly. The leader let out a short laugh and turned to the group. "I'm tired of these cliché speeches." No one replied. He turned back to Samuel, and this time his stare was sharper. "Who do you think you are, some kind of hero?" Samuel didn't reply. He took a half step back, not out of fear, but as if to maintain space. The gesture, however, became the spark that set off something he had quietly hoped wouldn't happen. No one had time to react. The young man stepped forward and shoved Samuel hard in the shoulder, making him stumble. Then, as if trying to prove something to himself, he threw a punch that landed directly against the old man's temple. It wasn't a powerful blow. There was no force from the hips or legs, but for a man who was 85, it was more than enough. Samuel lost his balance, his foot slipping on the thin glaze of snow, and he fell backward. The back of his head struck the concrete edge of the gas pump with a dull, cracking sound. Blood spread quickly through the snow beneath him, a deep red stain against a field of white. Everyone froze. For a brief moment, there was only the sound of wind. The one who had struck him stood motionless, staring at his own hand like he couldn't quite believe what he'd done. The others didn't move. A few phones appeared, and there was the faint sound of photos being taken, but not a single person stepped forward. Inside the nearby car, the woman still hadn't opened her door. She leaned forward in her seat, staring at the old man lying in the open, her palm pressed flat against the window, like she wanted to move but couldn't. Samuel didn't scream. He didn't groan. He lay there for a few seconds, eyes open, his breathing shallow but steady. Then, with slow effort, he rolled to one side and pushed himself up, using one hand against the frozen ground. Blood continued to drip from a wound at his temple, streaking down his cheek and falling in dark spots onto his white shirt. The boy at the register finally moved. He rushed out from behind the glass door, carrying a roll of paper towels. But as he approached within a few steps, he stopped again. He didn't dare come closer. Samuel didn't look at him, and he didn't look at the crowd. He quietly reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a neatly folded white handkerchief. A small blue initial was embroidered in the corner. It was a gift from his late wife, and he always kept it with him. He pressed it gently against the wound, and using the gas pump as support, slowly got to his feet. He stood there, slightly hunched, his hand still clutching the now bloodied cloth. But there was no anger in his face, no accusation. Only a still, patient silence, like someone who had been through far worse and had learned how to wait. The tattooed young man took 2 steps back. He wasn't laughing anymore. Neither were his friends. The woman in the car finally stepped out, slowly and shakily, her phone clutched in one hand. She wasn't recording, she was making a call. Across the street, a blue truck had just turned into the station. The blue pickup truck turned into the station just as the air had gone completely still. It pulled up beside an open pump near the store entrance. The engine rumbled for a moment, then quieted. The driver, a man in his mid-30s with broad shoulders, wore a work shirt dusted with grime. His hands were large and calloused, the kind shaped by years of labor. He stepped out without hesitation and without expression, but his eyes quickly scanned the entire scene. He saw the old man standing silently, blood still seeping beneath a damp handkerchief. He saw the group of young men backing away toward their motorcycles, their confidence shaken. He saw the clerk still frozen in place, keeping his distance. And he saw everyone else watching, doing nothing. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward Samuel. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Samuel gave a small nod. "I'm fine, son. Just a scratch." Caleb, that was the name stitched onto his chest, glanced down at the bloodied handkerchief, then back up. "That's more than a scratch," he said. "Let me help you sit down." Without waiting for permission, he gently took Samuel by the elbow and guided him to a plastic chair set outside the store. The clerk, as if suddenly energized, rushed out to unlock the door and brought out clean towels, bottled water, and a dusty first aid kit from beneath the counter. Caleb sat beside Samuel, opened the kit, and carefully began to clean the blood from around the wound. "I know who you are," Caleb said while working. "Last year I heard you speak at the Memorial Day ceremony." Samuel squinted slightly and looked at him. "You're McNamara's grandson?" Caleb paused, then let out a soft laugh. "You remember my grandfather? Your grandfather dropped his helmet on Hill 209 and almost took a bullet for it. I don't forget things like that." Caleb nodded. His movement slowed, as if the thing he was tending to wasn't just a wound, but a piece of something older they both understood in their own ways. By now, the group of young men had stepped farther back. They were no longer laughing, and they weren't trying to run either. All 5 stood close together, glancing occasionally toward Samuel and Caleb, then whispering among themselves. The tattooed one paced near his motorcycle, his face uneasy with something between guilt and uncertainty. Caleb turned his head and looked at them. He didn't raise his voice or posture with threat, but something in the weight of his presence made them freeze. "I'm calling the police," he said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've already taken down your license plates." Samuel gently placed a hand on Caleb's wrist. The gesture wasn't forceful, but it was enough to stop him. "There's no need to call the police," he said, his eyes calm as if no blood had been shed at all. Caleb turned to him. "They need to be held accountable for what they did." "You think they're not scared already?" Samuel asked, his gaze drifting toward the group of young men now standing quietly. "Can't you see it? The look in their eyes has changed. They know they went too far." "Knowing they're wrong doesn't make it right," Caleb said. "You still deserve to be protected." Samuel gave a faint smile. "I walked through 2 wars. I didn't make it because someone was always protecting me. I made it because I knew when to stand up and when to forgive." Caleb went quiet for a moment. Then he took out his phone. "I won't call 911, but I'm going to call someone they won't ignore." He turned slightly away from Samuel and dialed a familiar number. When the line connected, he spoke right away. "Chief Rains, I'm at Maynard Station. Something happened to your father." The voice on the other end came through clearly, even without speakerphone. "Is he all right?" "He's stable, but he's bleeding." A group of young guys. One of them threw a punch. "Are they still there?" "Yes, and I think they're starting to regret it." "Stay where you are, I'm close." Caleb ended the call and looked back at Samuel. "Your son's on his way." Samuel let out a slow breath and leaned back in the chair. "He always overreacts. He's the police chief. Reacting is part of the job. I told him not to drive that huge black SUV around town," Samuel muttered almost to himself. "Nobody needs to turn everything into a scene over one punch." "It's not about the punch," Caleb replied. It's about what you stand for. Inside the store, the young clerk brought out more cold towels and bottled water. He handed them over awkwardly, then scratched his head and looked down at the ground. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I should have done something, but I just froze." Samuel took the water bottle, his hand trembling slightly but steady enough to twist off the cap. He took a sip and set it gently beside his chair. "Fear is natural," he said. "What matters is whether you recognize it. Next time, you'll do better." A black SUV had just turned onto the street. There was no siren, no flashing lights, and no rush. Only presence. And that alone made it clear this wasn't over, though perhaps it hadn't truly started yet. The black SUV stopped directly in front of the store. Both front doors opened almost at the same time. The man who stepped out from the driver's seat was Dylan Raines, sheriff of the county. He was tall and solidly built, his uniform pressed without a single wrinkle. He didn't wear sunglasses or carry heavy gear. The expression on his face was more than enough to silence the group of young men. Dylan's eyes moved swiftly across the scene. He saw the blood-stained handkerchief in his father's hand, the wound still fresh. He saw Caleb seated beside him with the first aid kit open. Then he looked to the other side, where 5 young men stood in a loose line, tense like students who had just been called to the front of the class. No one said a word. Dylan walked toward them, his steps slow and steady, each footfall pressing firm into the snow. He stopped just a few paces away, arms relaxed at his sides, his eyes sharp, but his voice low and clear. "Which one of you hit him?" The group looked at each other. No one answered. Dylan took a deep breath. His voice dropped further, a quiet pulse of restrained control. "Let me make it clearer. Which one of you assaulted Samuel Raines, a Vietnam War veteran, a decorated recipient of the Medal of Valor, and my father?" The air turned heavy. Even the traffic on the nearby road seemed to disappear. One of the young men covered his face with his hand. Another stared down at the ground. The one with the tattoo stood still, his eyes wide, lips pressed tight as if he were fighting with something inside himself. Then slowly, he took a step forward and spoke in a rough, quiet voice. "It was me. I didn't mean to. Dylan didn't interrupt. He let him continue. "I lost control. I didn't know who he was." Dylan frowned. "So if he had just been a regular old man, it would have been okay to hit him?" "No, that's not what I meant," the man said quickly. "I just thought—" Dylan raised one hand, not harshly, but firmly. "I don't need your explanation. I didn't come here for excuses. I came because someone needed protection. And because a community needs to remember that the law doesn't protect people based on who they are. It protects what is right." The young man nodded, lips trembling slightly. Behind him, his friend stood still, frozen like stone. Dylan looked away from them and turned to his father. He stepped closer and lowered himself to one knee beside the plastic chair. "Are you all right, Dad?" Samuel gave a faint smile. His eyes were steady, even sharper than they had been earlier. "You got here fast. I don't like being late when I hear you're out here giving speeches in the snow." "I just told them to form a line," Samuel said with a light cough. "Though clearly, my method still needs work." A young officer stepped out from the passenger side of the SUV, following behind Dylan. He wore the insignia of the National Guard on his shoulder, and from the way he stood beside the sheriff, it was clear he wasn't just a colleague. He had likely trained under Samuel at some point. He said nothing, only gave a small nod toward the elderly man, a silent gesture of respect. Dylan stayed focused on the young men. "I'll need your full information," he said. "Assaulting an elderly person is a felony in this state." Samuel spoke up, and this time his voice carried more weight. "Hold on, Dylan." Everyone turned to him. Dylan looked back. "What did you say?" "I don't want to take this to court," Samuel said. "I want to give them a chance to make things right." "You were punched in the head," Dylan replied, his voice low and tense. "There's blood on your shirt. This isn't something we just let go." "I know that," Samuel nodded, "but if the law only exists to punish, then we've left no room for learning." Dylan looked at his father for a long moment. They didn't need many words to understand each other. Caleb, standing nearby, watched silently. His expression shifted from concern to quiet admiration. Samuel turned to the young officer. "Lieutenant, is your unit running any community projects right now?" The officer nodded. We're rebuilding the East Side Community Center. It's for veterans who need a place to gather through the winter. Perfect, Samuel replied. Then he turned to the group of young men. I won't ask my son to press charges, but you will commit to 60 hours of volunteer service there. No excuses, no skipping. While you're there, you'll meet people who have lived through the things I only mentioned briefly. If you still learn nothing, then the law can take over from there. No one answered at first. The tattooed young man nodded first. I'll do it, he said. And I'm sorry. Samuel met his eyes. I believe you, and I hope that belief isn't wasted. Dylan crossed his arms and let out a slow breath. I don't like this. I know, Samuel smiled, but you'll accept it. A second patrol car arrived just then. The officer inside stepped out, clipboard in hand, ready to take a formal statement. Dylan signaled for him to hold off and turned back to the group. Lieutenant Rodriguez will take your names and contact details, he said. If any of you skip even 1 hour, I'll reopen the case and press full charges. I'll be there, the second man said. Me too, added the third. The air felt a little lighter. Snow still fell in soft flurries, but no one was huddling against the cold anymore. Everyone stood straighter, as if they had just stepped out of something heavy and were now willing, maybe for the first time, to try something different. Exactly 1 month later, the atmosphere at Maynard Station was completely different. There was no shouting, no sidelong glances. Instead, the front lot was lined with neatly arranged folding chairs, each covered in white fabric. A small podium had been set up near the store entrance, flanked by 2 flags, one for the country and one representing the local Veterans Association. Around the edges were wreaths, photo displays, and handwritten banners from local residents. No one called it an official ceremony, but everyone showed up as if it were something they couldn't miss. Samuel sat in the front row, dressed in a crisply ironed blue shirt, hair neatly combed, and his silver pin polished until it gleamed. He frowned slightly as Caleb adjusted his tie, but he didn't resist. I don't think this is necessary, he muttered. Well, I do, Caleb replied, still working on the knot. Dylan sat on the other side of his father, in full uniform, quiet but steady. His gaze toward Samuel was full of quiet pride. Behind them were familiar faces, the shop owner from the corner store, the elderly couple who had witnessed the incident, the young clerk from the gas station, now wearing a clean white shirt and holding a box of water bottles to hand out for free. And to the right, sitting slightly apart from the others, were 5 young men, the same ones. But there were no leather jackets, no skull patches, just plain button-down shirts, clean jeans, and neatly trimmed hair. They didn't speak as they took their seats, but the way they looked at Samuel said enough. The master of ceremonies, a retired colonel, stepped up to the podium without a script. We are not here today to dwell on an unfortunate event, he said, his voice deep and warm. We are here to recognize something that's becoming harder to find. Steadfast character, even in the face of insult and injury. He briefly recounted what had happened, avoiding unnecessary details. Then he read an official commendation from the county, honoring Samuel Raines for nonviolent action and his positive influence on the community. Samuel made his way to the podium with Caleb's quiet support. He stood straight, without needing the microphone. I'm not a hero, he began. I'm just an old man who's seen enough to know that kindness is not weakness. It takes more courage than most fights ever will. As Samuel stepped down from the podium, the entire area fell silent. No one clapped at first. It wasn't out of indifference, but rather a moment of complete respect. Then unexpectedly, the tattooed young man rose from his seat. He walked slowly toward the front, his eyes steady, no longer avoiding anyone's gaze. Dylan looked like he might step in, but Samuel gave a small shake of his head. I'd like to say a few words, the young man said. I know I don't deserve to be up here, but Mr. Raines gave me a second chance, and I can't miss the opportunity to thank him in front of everyone. No one interrupted. He took a breath and continued. I used to think being loud was being right, that strength meant never backing down, and if someone didn't move, you just made them. But I was wrong. 60 hours at the Veterans Center taught me things I never used to care about. One old man told me how, when he came back from the war, even his family didn't recognize him, but his fellow soldiers never forgot his name. They treated each other like brothers. He turned and looked at Samuel. I don't claim to understand it all, but I know I struck a man I should have stood up to honor. And every night since, I've thought about what it would have meant if he hadn't gotten back up. His voice faltered. We've completed more than 60 hours, and next month all of us are enlisting. We want to earn the respect we failed to show the first time. Applause began softly from the back row. Then another. Soon the whole crowd was clapping, not just for the apology, but for the courage to own it. Dylan stood still, then gave a slight nod. Caleb reached out and squeezed Samuel's shoulder, the kind of quiet gesture that said, "You did it." The ceremony didn't end with fanfare. It ended with warmth. People stood, shook hands, shared stories, and took pictures beside the new plaque just outside the store. That plaque had been the shop owner's idea. It displayed a large black and white photo of a young Samuel in uniform, standing beside an old Jeep. Beneath it, engraved in brass, were the words, "Honor isn't only earned on the battlefield. Sometimes it's upheld between a gas pump and silence." Samuel quietly stepped away from the gathering and walked toward his old Buick, still parked at the edge of the lot. As he reached for the door, a voice called out behind him. It was Mr. McNamara, the veteran Samuel had once saved on a snowy hill long ago. He stood with Caleb, leaning on a cane, wearing a faded military uniform. "Staff Sergeant Rains," he said, his voice shaky but clear. "Hill 209, November 1952. You dragged me out after I lost both legs to shrapnel. I owe you my life." Samuel froze for a moment. His eyes widened. Then he gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "You're still standing, still upright." "Because of you," McNamara replied. "And now I hear you're still fighting, just in a different way." Samuel smiled, a genuine smile that seemed to erase the years from his face. "Not fighting anymore, just reminding folks why we ever did."